All right, today we're going to dive into a really fascinating paradox. It kicks off with this super controversial diet that, seems to fly in the face of basic biology. But the answer? Oh, it takes us millions of years back in our evolutionary past to dig up a genetic secret that's literally written in our DNA.
Now, that is a pretty bold statement, right? This actually comes from a recent scientific paper, and it just perfectly nails the core belief of the carnivore diet. I mean, it basically challenges decades of nutritional advice and really sets the stage for a super interesting debate. Okay, so first up, let's just get on the same page. What exactly is this all-meat diet that's got everybody talking? So, at its core, the rule is really simple. If it didn't come from an animal, you just don't eat it. We're talking meat, fish, eggs, and for some people, dairy. It's also a really strict version of a keto diet, which means it's so low in carbs that your body has no choice but to start burning fat for fuel. So you gotta wonder, why are people jumping on such an extreme diet? Well, a survey of more than 2,000 people who follow it found that the motivation is crystal clear. An absolutely overwhelming 93% said they started for health reasons. A lot of them were hoping to fix chronic issues that, nothing else had touched. But of course, an all-meat diet, that immediately raises this huge historical red flag, especially for anyone who remembers those old stories about sailors on long voyages. And this brings us right to the heart of the conflict in our story. Yeah, scurvy, that infamous, dreaded disease you get from not having enough vitamin C. And we're all taught that vitamin C comes from fruits and veggies, right? So the big question is, if you're not eating any plants, how on earth do you not get scurvy? Well, history actually gives us some clues. You can look at peoples like the Inuit, who traditionally ate almost no plants, and they figured it out. Turns out they ate parts of the animal that are surprisingly rich in vitamin C, things like organ meats and adrenal glands. And here's the key. They often ate their meat raw. See, cooking destroys vitamin C, so raw sources like muktuk, which is whale skin and blubber, were absolutely vital. And here's where it gets even more interesting from a biochemistry standpoint. It turns out vitamin C and glucose, or sugar, kind of compete with each other. They're involved in similar pathways. So the theory goes that if you slash your carb intake, your body's demand for vitamin C just plummets. You just might not need as much as someone who's eating a ton of bread and pasta. But, this whole conversation, this whole problem of getting enough vitamin C, it only exists because of a really strange quirk in our genetics. The scurvy question is actually just the tip of the iceberg of a much bigger, much older evolutionary puzzle that's literally written into our DNA.
Okay, get this. Almost all other mammals, we're talking over 4,000 species, your dog, your cat, they just make their own vitamin C internally from glucose. They literally never have to think about it. But us, humans are part of this tiny, kind of weird club that just can't. We share this disadvantage with our primate cousins, guinea pigs, and a few types of fruit bats. So what went wrong with us?
The answer comes down to one specific gene. It's called GULO. This gene holds the instructions for the enzyme that does the very last step in making vitamin C. And in our distant ancestors, millions of years ago, this gene got hit with a mutation, and it just broke. So we actually still carried this broken gene. It's called a pseudogene, but it's basically a fossil in our DNA. It doesn't do anything. So why? Why would evolution just let such a critical gene break and stay broken? Well, scientists have a couple of main ideas. One is simply energy conservation. I mean, making vitamin C from scratch takes a lot of energy. So if our primate ancestors were living in the tropics, eating fruit all day long, they were getting a ton of vitamin C from their diet. There was just no reason to keep that internal factory running. So the gene broke, and nobody noticed. It didn't matter. For the longest time, scientists looked at this as a kind of inborn metabolic error, a genetic flaw. But newer science is suggesting that's not the whole story at all. It turns out evolution gave us this incredibly clever workaround. It basically turned what looks like a weakness into a kind of superpower of efficiency. And the hero of this part of the story is a tiny protein on our red blood cells. It's called the GLUT1 transporter. You can think of it like a special doorway into the cell. Now, its main job is to let sugar, glucose, in, but it has this secret second job that is absolutely key to our survival. Okay, so here's how this amazing system works. When your body uses vitamin C, it gets used up and turns into an oxidized form called DHA. Then these GLUT1 transporters on our red blood cells see that used up DHA, they grab it, and they pull it inside the cell. Once inside, it gets instantly recharged, turned right back into fresh, good-as-new vitamin C, and then it's sent back out into the body to be used again. It's just an incredibly elegant and efficient recycling system. It's beautiful, really. So here's the bottom line. Because of this amazing recycling system, we humans are extraordinarily efficient with the vitamin C we get from our food. We need way, way less in our diet than an animal, like a rat, for example, that can't recycle it so well. So that genetic flaw we talked about, it's actually paired with this brilliant adaptation for efficiency. The two go hand in hand. Okay, so now that we have all that evolutionary background, let's circle all the way back to the modern carnivore diet. What does the actual data tell us about the people who are eating this way right now? So, a big survey from 2021 gives us one of the first really large snapshots. It looked at just over 2,000 people who had been on a carnivore diet for at least 6 months. And what they found was, well, it was a mixed bag. On one hand, you had people reporting really high levels of satisfaction. They talked about big improvements in chronic health issues and some really significant benefits for those with diabetes. But on the other hand, when you look at their blood work, it raised some pretty serious red flags for doctors, especially when it came to their cholesterol. And this chart really shows you that paradox. So for the people on the survey who shared their lab results, their HDL, that's the good cholesterol, and their triglycerides looked great, totally optimal. But their LDL, the so-called bad cholesterol, was often sky high. We're talking levels that would make most cardiologists really, really nervous. And honestly, this is one of the biggest controversies still raging about this diet. In the end, the researchers themselves wrapped up their paper with a really important warning. They pointed out, look, this is a survey. People are just telling us what they experienced. It's not a controlled clinical trial. We just don't have the long-term data yet to know what the full, real effects of eating this way are. Basically, a lot more serious research is needed, for sure. And all of this leaves us with one last really fascinating question to think about. This whole complex story, from the carnivore diet to our broken vitamin gene and that amazing recycling system, it reveals this incredibly deep connection between what we eat and our own DNA. And it really forces us to ask, could our deep evolutionary past actually hold the key to figuring out our nutritional future?